speaker, Dr. Stacee Reicherzer, is a professional counselor and educator whose clinical and academic work has centered on the experiences of being made to feel other or different. She has written extensively and given presentations on a variety of women's issues that include family violence prevention, enhancing romantic bonds between partners, and addressing the realities of childhood trauma in adulthood. Her most recent work, an article for Family Circle magazine entitled, "What Are You Looking At?" gives voice to mothers who are raising children with disabilities or have other conditions which cause people to stare and make comments. It's due out in July 2016. Please help me welcome Dr. Stacee Reicherzer.
Thank you everyone. And can we go ahead and give a special shout out to Carolina and to Kasia for putting this together. This is an amazing conference and it's a whole lot of work, so can we give a special round of applause? I was saying to Carolina, this is like planning a wedding when you try to put a conference together, and she said, yeah, except there's no honeymoon at the end of it. So at the end, you just start looking at next year and saying, well, what do we want to do differently, and what do we need to be thinking about right now? So welcome, everybody, and I'm so grateful that you all could be here to talk about women's self-sabotage, and specifically how these things really get ingrained and how we begin these experiences and how we start doing the kinds of things that really work against our own self-good. And also, most importantly, how do we transform that? How do we do something different in response to it? How can we disrupt our patterns that derail us and that take us to places that we don't want to go? So again, very appreciative of you all for staying around today for today's presentation. So let's talk about self-sabotage, because it's one of those things that's really interesting. And I work in higher education. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this, where first-generation college students are coming in. Many times they are far and away doing more than anybody else they've ever known. They are working very hard, and I suspect this is a story for some of the people in this room. You're working on your degree, you're doing a lot of things that nobody else you know is doing, and you start seeing your goals coming into sight. Things are starting to come into play. All the stuff that you have worked really hard to bring forward is visible. You can see the goal, you can see the finish line, and then what happens? You start doing the kinds of things that perhaps you've done in other periods of your life. You start seeing that possibility, you start seeing the end of the rainbow, and then what do? You start derailing it. You start putting up barriers. You start thinking about things that will keep you from reaching your goal. And we don't just do this in education, we do it in our careers. We do it in a lot of different areas of our lives. The things that we work so hard for so often, and the things that really are the promise that we told ourselves when we were 8 years old, we were going to work really hard and make happen. When those things start to come together and we start creating that possibility, just when we get to that finish line, we start derailing. We start sabotaging ourselves. We start doing the things to work against our own success. Now, is there anybody in here who knows what I'm talking about when I say that? Oh, I see some hands. Okay, people are like, oh. And say, Dr. Stacee's speaking to us today. Well, you know, that's a common experience, and that's the thing, is that these things happen, and there are people's realities. People do work against our own success, and that's not anything that is ingrained. It's not something that's, let me say, it's ingrained, but it's not something that you have to always do. It's something that can be changed, something that can be transformed, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to do it a little bit in an abbreviated format, because I know that you all have been at a conference all day long and you want to go home and rest your heads, or go to St. Patrick's Day events downtown, whatever the case is. So I came out of it, so trust me, be cautious when you go into all that mess. So it is setting goals, and then having a really specific idea, and then constructing the barriers to ourselves. But how do we learn this? Where did all this stuff come from? Because surely there's not something that's biologically innate that makes us do this kind of thing. Well, And this is an interesting thing because historically, many women have experienced this, that the rules in your household may have been very different for you. That there was somebody that was expecting you to do something that wasn't focused on you. You were busy taking care of somebody else when you were a child. This is part of your development. This happens a lot of times. This is a very common thing, and it's been certainly one of the things that we've seen to be true for women throughout history, because girls were being raised to be nurturers. And so many women grew up taking care of younger siblings, taking care of perhaps a grandparent, perhaps a disabled parent or other family member. There are a lot of those kinds of things that women have been raised to do, and to put others' needs in front of their own. And so that becomes such a conditioned set of responses, and those become the kinds of things that just feel very natural to women and to people who are in the role of nurturer and who are having to be in the place of caregiving for somebody else in their lives. And so that's something that we know is part of social development. Now, what's also true is that when you learn from a young age that your interests are secondary to those of somebody else and that you have a responsibility as a caregiver, part of what occurs with that is a notion that somehow you need to always be taking care of other people, even after you're no longer in that particular role. The younger siblings that maybe you were helping take care of, they may be grown, but somehow you're still in that mindset, and you're still thinking about other people, and you're still trying to caretake, to be responsive to these relationships. And that's a really very important thing. It's important to understand relational responsibilities, but what happens is that when we put others' needs ahead of our own consistently, we have difficulty seeing our own needs and our responsibilities to ourselves. And as a result of that, it sometimes is difficult to move forward with the things that we want for our lives. And so I'm seeing some people that are kind of thinking about this, and you're probably right. And that's true. And this is again one of those things that isn't just what women do, but this is something that is part of girls and women's conditioning. Now also, and there's another fundamental piece to this, is that for many girls and boys as well, a sense of being different or other is instilled from a young age. And so there's a part of it that's conditioning, certainly from in one's family of origin, but also there are a whole lot of different experiences that one has where one knows, what one comes to learn, what it is to be different, what it is to be somehow, to be made to feel less than. And I think a lot of you know what I'm talking about when I say that. There are a lot of different ways that this can happen. Sometimes it does happen in our family of origin. Sometimes we were the ones who were not the favored brother or sister. We were the ones who were perhaps the less attractive, the less athletic, the less smart, perhaps the darkest one in our family. We were the one who was head and shoulders above the other girls, and so and didn't have the same opportunities and affection that we saw our siblings receive. Maybe we had a step-parent, and the step-parent had a way of treating us that was different from how our step-siblings were being treated. Maybe these things, though, happened at other places, and so often this occurs when we were in elementary school, middle school, and these places where we were the kids who were different, and we knew that we were different, and those differences occurred along a lot of different paths. And so when we talk about being other, it means a whole lot of things. It can certainly be about our gender, but it can also be about the color of our skin. It could also be because we had curly hair and glasses, or because we had a visible scar, or because we had difficulty walking, or because of the size of our body, or because of a variety of other reasons, right? These are the things that become instilled. These are the ways in which we are made to feel different or other. These are the things that become part of our lives and our identity. And as a result of being made to feel other, we get a very specific message, don't we? When we're the one who was made to feel different, for whatever that reason was, whatever that difference was, we get a very specific set of messages about ourselves. We've learned a lot of information, and part of what that information is is the stuff that we're talking about today. We learn that we somehow are less than, that we're less deserving. We learn that we don't have the same privileges that other people have. We come to believe that we don't get to access the same goodies that other people do in life, right? This is what it means to feel other. And so what we know about that is that when you were a child who was different, when you were made to feel different, that difference, that experience there's some noise out in the hall. St. Patrick's Day is happening in the hall right at Oakton Community College, folks. And so the party has made its way to Des Plaines. So give it up. So but everybody who's ever experienced this, who's ever been made to feel different, carries that message throughout their lives. Whatever and whenever that became instilled, whether it was in 5th grade, whether it was sorry about that. Thank you for getting the tour. Whatever our situation was, that message, that experience, that belief that somehow we're less than, that we're different, stays with us. And it's with us at those most vulnerable times throughout our lifespan. The things that people told us, the things that we were made to feel when we were young, are there, and they come up at the most inconvenient of times. And so it's a remarkably, I was going to say it's a remarkable thing, but that's remarkable, I mean, in terms of problematic. It is traumatic, and part of that is that, and this is a really important piece to understand, is that we talk about trauma and we think about trauma as something that is really limited to things like really horrific experiences, like domestic violence, like sexual violence, like the things that vets experience. That's traumatic. But what is also true is that trauma is very uniquely defined, and each individual has their own experiences of trauma, and we don't know what somebody else's experiences of trauma were, or how they were made to feel different, how they were made to feel other. But we do know that this is a universal experience of otherness, is that it is traumatic. What's also true is it's an assault on our sense of self, because as children, until we're made to feel less than because of differences that we have, we don't really notice those differences. We're just sort of being children, and that's part of what happens. We're just sort of going through life and doing whatever kids do until that moment where we're made to feel different because of whatever that difference is. It also informs who we understand ourselves to be in that moment and each moment after that. And that's the piece that I want you to recognize as we talk about self-sabotage. Now, we got a little exercise. You thought you were going to rest your head at 4 o'clock, didn't you? Finally, this conference is coming to an end. I'm just going to coast in. So what I'd like everybody to go ahead and do, if you would please, and this is of course optional, but is to go ahead and take out a sheet of paper and go ahead and start this exercise just thinking about and reflecting upon the first time I knew I was other. And so I'll give you a couple of minutes. And so, now you know you want to do it too. I know you're just looking at me, but you can do it. So we'll give a couple of minutes just to go ahead and complete the exercise, and then we'll check back in. Okay? So, for the sake of time, because I know that we started a little bit late, I'm going to go ahead and move us along, and you can continue writing throughout the session as you wish to. Exercise. So, item number 4 is an interesting point, but the first of these, the first time I knew I was other, this is the point at which we knew we were made to feel different, and the circumstances and the feelings, of course, that surround it, they tend to be a lot of sadness, a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, a lot of, I think, sometimes surprise, because people don't generally know that we're different until somebody tells us we're different. But also, there's the point, item number 4 is from that point on, I learned to take care of myself by, and that's a really important piece of this, because this is part of what we understand is learned about our development. We do this thing where we learn to take care of ourselves, and in childhood, this is very true. We start to disconnect ourselves from those feelings of vulnerability. We start to do the kinds of things that we need to keep ourselves safe in situations, because we're no longer really as innocent in peer interactions and things like that, because we know what we're up against. And so So the part I want to emphasize is that self-sabotage starts to get learned in item number 4. So the truth about otherness is that in truth, the truth is that in truth, as we move forward over time, when you're made to feel different, the truth that we have an ability to come to understand this as a source of strength. It becomes a source of strength because what's true is that people who were made to feel different over time also understand that that source of difference is something that we can leverage and that we can really use as a source of creativity. Am I right? We use it as a source of self-knowledge and self-worth, and in our adulthood, we oftentimes learn a whole lot of things that are resourceful about ourselves from those experiences as children. We start to learn what it is, and that there's something that we know we went through, and we can think about that stuff. We can think about the experiences that we had, and move forward from them. We can think about how bad it was in school and say, you know what, that's the past. I know what I need to do today. I'm a lot more confident. That was a horrible time, but look at me today. That happened a lot, and that's a really good thing. That's a good use of strength, and certainly self-knowledge, because when you've been marginalized, you know a whole lot more about the world because of the fact that you experienced that. But what's also true is that it enhances our ability to feel empathy, and this is a really important piece. Because as a result of being made to feel different, I can really care about each of your experiences on a wholly other way than had I spent an entire life experiencing privilege and in which nobody ever made me feel different. But because I have been made to feel different, I know what it is, and I understand another person's experiences and pain on a whole other level. And even if I don't share a history with that person or share the particular brand of marginalization that she or he has experienced, I also know that there's something really important and that I can come to care about deeply and to understand, you know what, when this person is just acting in a certain way, I imagine they're maybe kind of hurt. I imagine there's something there that I'm not seeing. And that helps me a little bit to put things in perspective when I look at events, when I look at people's weird stuff that they're doing, when they're being aggressive drivers, or whenever they're doing odd stuff, I can look at their stuff and say, you know what, I understand what that is, and I know where that probably comes from. And I can, at my best, now I don't always do that, but I'd like to think that I always have empathy and can experience relationships on a whole other level, but that isn't always true. So, but it also leads us to take on social justice issues, right? Some of us have really become very committed to advocacy, and I've heard some great people speaking in this room and talking about the work that you're doing and talking about the efforts that you're making to transform whatever your corner of the world is and whatever within your experience. You start doing those kinds of things. You start mobilizing and doing what you can, even if it's just being nice to your neighbor, even if it's just being nice to somebody that you work with who's in pain. But what's also true is that there are a lot of, whereas there are good things that happen when we can grow through, it's also the case that otherness instills a sense of rejection that informs our lives and relationships. And so it fascinates me how often my own experiences of otherness can come up in my own life, even today, after all this work. I mean, I've been doing this kind of presentation for a long time, and Dr. Stacee's not as young as she looks. She's had a lot of Botox and other things done, so she looks much younger than she is. Trust, she's not. So even today, with all that I've done, it's amazing how many times I can suddenly be that 5th grade child again. I can still remember the experiences. I still can feel the sting of being called a faggot. I know what that is. And that's with me in that moment. And those are the realities of people's experiences, that when we're in moments of stress, when we have when we're leading our lives and we're in a situation that causes us to doubt ourselves, it's so interesting because it's like a domino effect, and it goes all the way back to these experiences when doubt became instilled, when a sense of being less than became a part of our experiences. And I think about that, and I can feel that stuff intensely. But what's true is that those experiences, of course, are what will come up when there's something new going on. And we think about again, self-sabotage, the thing is that that's a place, when we're setting a goal and we're trying to do something, that's a place of great anxiety because we're trying to make something new happen. And suddenly all of these kinds of things, all this self-doubt comes up from this place of deep experiences and deep history. Suddenly, there we are. It's right there in our reality. And as a result of that, we can shoot for less than our potential. We sometimes don't want to go into those difficult places. We don't want to we don't want to try because we know that it's going to be vulnerable. We don't want to do anything that's going to be vulnerable again. We don't want to put ourselves in a potential place of hurt because we've still got so much doubt that is instilled in us. What's also true is that there are all kinds of things that we believe that we don't deserve as a result of that. It could be love, it could be success, it could be a lot of other positives for our life that we just start to sell ourselves short because of the stuff that we learned about ourselves. Because somebody told us that we were ugly. Somebody told us that we weren't smart enough. Somebody told us that we weren't ever going to make it in XYZ, whatever that is. Somebody told us that we just didn't have what it took, or that we somehow didn't deserve what we wanted. And that little voice is right there. It's there again and again and again. And when we listen to that voice, every time we do, we shoot for less. We go for less than what is our potential. And so, what I call character traps are those things that we start to fall into. And these are the ways that we learn to operate with all of this sense of otherness. They're from a long time ago. And the experiences of character traps are such that we are acting from a way that really reflects our woundedness, our pain. It doesn't reflect necessarily the part that today is in charge of really creating what's best for us. It's the stuff, it's the old tapes. It's the things that we don't want to have there anymore. So what is a character trap? It begins as a method for coping with the experience of otherness. It was the stuff that we learned a long time ago. We learned somewhere along the line that there were ways that we needed to deal with and adapt to the world that was mistreating us. And so that's what we did. And so whatever that was, it required us to kind of put on a little guard, a little show, a little whatever it is. We had to do things to keep ourselves safe. And if you think about that, you can think about perhaps about your own experiences and think about how you learn to kind of maneuver around those experiences of being the kid who was different, and the experiences of that, of being whatever that difference was, whatever your otherness is or was. You can think about how you learned to sort of tiptoe around that, and how you learned to really armor yourself to face the world. And that's what a character trap is. And so we learn it, we adapt it, because we had to survive. We had to just be in whatever circumstances we were, no matter how ruthless the household we were growing up in was, or the school, or the neighborhood, or whatever the society experience we were having was. And so, so from there, it becomes something that's embedded, and we just we use it and we just react to things in life whenever we're in these stressful situations. And so, and it comes back again and again and again. Now what happens is that it leaves us with this barrier that impedes success, because obviously if I'm operating from a character trap that is based on old stuff and based on my wounding, then I'm probably not doing something that's for my greater good. Am I right? So let's talk about the 6 character traps. And the first is the controller. And that probably, and so probably you could look at the controller and start thinking about that and say, you know, I know controllers in my life. Well, let's talk about the controller. The controller is the person who is learned to deal with a sense of otherness by always walking into the room and just taking control, being in charge of things. And they do this, and when I say the room, I mean certainly it's a physical room, but it's also the life spaces that they occupy. So their relationships, the job, they take charge. They will let everybody know that they're the ones that they've got this. You know, we know what we're doing. I'm a control. Hey, you know, no worries. Meanwhile, they're torn up inside. They have so much doubt. They're wondering if they really got to know the real me. There's so much that's happening and they have none of the of that amazing valor that we see. They're very timid inside. They're really doubting themselves at the same time. But a controller will walk into a situation and attempt to exert control. But if you think about this, it's easy to see where somebody learned to do this, because if you were being picked on as a child, then you know that the way to avoid being picked on was to let people know you aren't vulnerable. You're not going to pick on this. So just walk into the room and appear confident, and controllers learned at some point, if this is true of you, you're like, oh, that's true of me, I did do that. Controllers learned to move into a space and to appear confident and to appear like they knew what they were doing. They appeared to understand what it is that they were doing, and they moved into the spaces and said, you know what? People don't pick on me as much because I do this. They figured out a way to keep the world from mistreating them, and that's what they did. And so it's entirely learned. It's an amazing experience, but that's how people came to adapt those characteristics. And so so as a result of that, they're still holding on to this stuff. They're still doing these kinds of things. What is also true, though, is that because they're operating from a place that really represents a trap versus their authentic self, they are oftentimes undermining themselves at the same time. They are attempting to achieve things, but what's also true is that when you do that, you lose a lot of people along the way, because a lot of people have difficulty being connected to and in relationship with controllers. The next one's the victim. Now the victim is an interesting character trap, because a victim is a person who wants to exert control, but in a very underhanded way. So the controller goes at you like this. A victim will go at you like this. And if you've ever been in a relationship with somebody who manipulated you, attempted to manipulate your guilt, for example, or manipulate you to do things that you didn't necessarily want to do, manipulated your feelings, then you know what I'm talking about with this. And so that there was just no winning of a situation with this person, because they were always trying to manipulate you. They didn't ask for what they wanted directly. Instead, they go ahead and just hint about it. Well, you don't have to if you don't want to. I'll just take care of this on my own. That's the kind of stuff that victims do. And so, and if you do it, hey, no shame in our game. You know, we all do this stuff. It's all developmental. So, but it's a learned characteristic though, because what happened was, and again, developmentally, a victim learned to do this kind of stuff differently from what a controller did, because a controller learned to come into the room and like, hey, I'm good, I'm in control. A victim instead learned to go ahead and put their stuff just out there. They were just the ones that are always in pain, and learned to manipulate people, to take care of them, to always worry about them. So they were the ones that seemed to always have it much worse than other people. And so they kind of put themselves out there in a way that reflected a lot of what might be called martyrdom and that sort of characteristic. They were the ones that they wanted you to feel sorry for them. They want us to feel sorry for them. That's what a victim did, and that's developmentally where that came from. So perhaps it was, and we think about like the people who seem to always have mysterious illnesses that don't have any real physical characteristic. It's oftentimes it's rooted in that, and hypochondria is rooted in an identity as a victim. Now the next one is the escape artist. And this is the person, again, these are pretty easy to understand. This is the person that checks out when things get rough. And so checking out can mean a lot of things. Checking out can mean that this is the person that seemed to be, maybe you were in a relationship with this person just kind of did this and backed on out the door. That didn't ever tell you directly what was going on for them, but just when life got stressful, they started to back away. When we think about the experiences of folks who discovered drugs, who discovered alcohol abuse, who discovered whatever method they had for checking out, that was an escape artist mechanism. And this is very common in our culture. We see a lot of it. It's not, and in today's world, there are so many different ways that people can check out. I think about how many people get addicted to gaming. People get, and I say addiction, but it's probably more of a compulsive behavior than an actual addiction in the way that drugs are. But people become just really focused on something that is escape-oriented in nature. Again, we all do this by degree. I mean, I'm sure that there are people in this room who have checked Facebook a time or two while they were supposed to be doing something else, and it was just like, this. And so you don't want to be on your task, and so you're just in Facebook land or social media, or watching something on YouTube. And so that's an escape artist character is probably on a 1 to 10 scale, more of a 1 versus a 10. But we can see that this is something that, again, is just very common, and we all possess these to degrees. It's just a matter of which are the most prevalent and which are the ones that really trap us the most in our lives. And so the next one is the consumer, and this is a person who learned to satisfy that sense of longing, that sense of emptiness by material acquisition. Lots of acquisition, lots of shopping, lots of buying. So buying what's new, keeping up with one's sister or brother or best friend or neighbor. There are people who will see somebody have something and just really have a sense of anxiety that they don't have that same new thing. They need to have the next one. There are people who consume and acquire large numbers of collectibles, for example, that they perhaps can't afford. But because the experience of acquisition is somehow itself satisfying, it soothes a part of them. They can't resist the bargain, so they are hitting the flea markets and hitting whatever it is that they're doing to acquire, and that's part of what consumerism is. Again, it's just part of a hunger that that's fed from a sense of emptiness, from a sense of otherness. Our next is the chaser, and this is the person who always was looking for love. I heard giggles, so people are like, ooh, I know about that. And so this is the person who was looking for love, but oftentimes when they found what was the object, the person that they were chasing, they were after somebody else, and then they pursued that relationship, and then when they were in the relationship, they realized that the person was another human being, a Homo sapien who had like flaws and stuff like that, and so and they lost interest in it because it was no longer about the chase. It was now dealing with this person that is, has all kinds of human foibles and does weird things and their own habits and stuff like that, and they lose interest. And that is, again, a very common characteristic that comes from a sense of loss and from deprivation that is part of otherness, because otherness is itself a relational violation. And so somebody who has experienced that is very often looking for love, looking for something to confirm their sense of wellness and their sense of personhood. And the last of these is the predator. Now, predator, of course, means a lot of things, and we talk about it in domestic violence and in other situations that are related to it. We understand a predator is to be somebody who is aggressively and dangerously pursuing or has pursued another person, a person who is who we now think of as a survivor. But what's also true is that as with the character traps, the predator is with us at all times. This is with everybody. And if we think about different ways that people learn to prey, and I say prey, P-R-E-Y, not P-R-A-Y. Those are two different things. But predation is a learned characteristic too, again, through otherness. Because if you were a kid who was bullied, you may have learned that somehow a way to not be bullied would be to somehow ally with yourself with a group of people and to somehow bully somebody else. Well, those kinds of characteristics stay with people. And if you think about the mean-spiritedness that happens, gossip happens, if we think about just what it is to derail or to undermine a colleague or a cousin or somebody else who is within our relational network, we know that in fact there's something that's really behind that. It is saying and doing things that are for the intention of undermining, and that's really what that is. But that comes from a place again of otherness wounding. It's something that's really deep. It's part of it. Again, it's it's horrible to say this, but of course everybody has all these character traps, and they're everybody's reality. So it's important to know and to be able to look at oneself, because if we know this stuff about ourselves and say, you know what, when I'm really stressed out, I know I've been mean. I know I've said things about really smart, kind people who were just trying their hardest, and I could say, you know what, she's just so disorganized, you know, and it's easy for me to go ahead and do that, and that comes from a place of my own wounding, and that's and my own otherness, and trying to better myself in relation to somebody else. Now, exercise 2, we get to identify our own character traps. And you're like, I don't have any more insight left in my mind, because this is the end of the day. And so just try and do this if you can for just we'll do a bit about a minute, just to think about what character traps you fall into most often, and how operating from character traps may impede your success in one or more areas. If you can just identify one character trap and one way in which it's impeded, and if you want to just think about this quietly to yourself, that's fine. So the character traps, once again, are here, and so the question is, what do you see that might be most prevalent for you, and also, when you think about that, how may it have impeded you in your current life situation? How has it impeded you from trying to reach a particular goal in whatever area? Okay, I am going to go ahead and move on for the sake of time, because I know that we're at the end of our day, and we want to go ahead and keep things moving. So, just moving into a place of awareness. The thing about character traps is that we want to understand the situations that trigger them. What creates character traps? What leads us into them in our present lives? So if we think about when we're acting from a controller perspective, or we're acting from a place, an escape artist perspective, or we're being a consumer, or we're noticing ourselves just kind of going into that predator thing and saying, hey, why am I saying mean things about my colleague here? Those are the kinds of things that we want to know. What are the situations, though, that lead for that? What are the precipitating events? That's really very, very helpful and insightful information to have about ourselves in our present situation. Because when we know those kinds of things, we'll be able to pause ourselves. Yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
So what you're sharing with us about character traps and otherness and whatnot, is this, are you talking from a woman's perspective or a person perspective? Like this is applicable for anybody, or is it more so applicable for women?
That's a great question. So the question is this, when we talk about character traps, is it specifically applicable to women, or is it applicable to other people? Let me ask you all this. When you think about what I'm talking about, does it have application to men's issues as well? Can you think of this?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to make sure that I was on the same page with you.
You are on the same page. You're like, wait a second, do guys do this too? And so yes, they do. And so that was the long-end way of answering that. Absolutely, these are universal experiences and it's amazing to me the more I do this presentation, and with very, very diverse audiences, how many people I see resonating with this stuff. I can do this presentation in a lot of different academic settings. I can do it in professional settings, working with I can do it with just in the community, and it's amazing how many people resonate with the notion of otherness and with the notion of character traps. And so, yes, indeed, there are. This is applicable to people of all genders. And so, and again, moving into awareness, we do understand the situations that trigger them, but we tend to stop fearing success because we know at the end of the day that all of that anxiety that we're having, all of that fear, all of whatever's getting kicked up about that's happening in that moment, that's just old stuff. That's just an old voice that's there. That's just part of the picture, and we know that's going to come. It's sort of like the pain that goes on. You know, when you go to the gym for the first time, like me, I just started back at the gym like it's been a long time, and I knew that the first week I was going to be horrifically sore. That's just part of my own. That's part of the experience. It's the same type of thing. We know that there's going to be natural products of doing hard work, and we know that when we choose a new plateau for ourselves, whether it's going for a promotion, whether it's going for a college degree, whether it's making a conscious decision to follow a dream, to write and to do something creative, we know that there's going to be a whole lot of doubts that come up for that. And so we stop fearing that success because we know it's just going to be a part of our reality, and we know that that we can pass through it. And whatever stuff is coming up, whatever little voices, we can move through those things. But we also know that there's strength. We know that we've moved through things. We can look back on our lives and say, you know what? I might be fearing this right now, but I also know there's a whole lot of information I've gotten along the way about myself. I have done a lot of things in my life, and I can go ahead and draw from that experience. I can take those experiences that have happened in the past and move through them. I can trust, and I can achieve whatever it is I need to achieve. And that's a piece that I wanted to emphasize to you all, is that character strength is the truer part of us. This is the part that really is that we want to keep with us. Everybody who's experienced being made to feel different, being made to feel other, for whatever reasons that there may be, it's important to note that those experiences aren't something to shut the door on or want to walk away from. They're experiences that are a source of information for our lives, and that can be a source of healing and can be a source of awareness for being able to create transformation for ourselves and in our work with other people. For those of us like myself who are in helping professions or whatever, working with other people or doing things in life that require our empathy are. We've got exercise 3, and I know everybody's like, I don't want to do more exercises. So humor me, just look at it. So instead of offering, so when you think about this, and again, this is one of those things that you can just sort of reflect on quietly. When we're operating from a place of strength, what are we doing differently? When you think about when you're in your strongest, when you're operating from that place of knowing, when you're operating from that place of awareness, what's different? What are the qualities that are different? What feels different about it? And some of you are like, yeah, that's kind of good. I'm going to pull out my pen and write that one down. So, and the part 2 of that is next time you have a goal that you're trying to accomplish, with all the stuff that comes up and all the things that block you, how can you use your strength to see your goal through to completion? How can you draw from that place of knowing, of awareness, instead of falling into a trap, instead of falling into something that is self-defeating? How can you go from operate from a place of strength, so that you can move forward, and that you can just say, you know what, that little voice is there, that's good information, but I'm going to go ahead and move forward. I'm going to make this happen. And that concludes my conversation with you all today, but you can keep the conversation going and follow me on social media. I'm at drstacee.com. You can follow me, you can tweet me, you can check me out on Twitter, or rather on Facebook, on LinkedIn. You can visit my website. I'm happy to have a conversation about otherness. I'm happy to come and speak to you again about otherness. Thank you all so very much. I really appreciate you sticking around to the end of the day.